Very much, Tama. I'm going to, if I may, just put some slides that I've prepared on screen. So just bear with me for a second. All right. Hopefully you all can see that. Somebody give me a thumbs up, please, if you can. All right. Perfect. So thank you so much, Tema. I'm really, really thrilled to be here with all of you. I remember years ago, as Jonathan said, when we first started to discuss this initiative, and it's just, so fulfilling to see it coming to fruition. Huge kudos and kol hakavod to Tema and her entire team for putting this thing together. As Tema said, I've been served in multiple roles within ADL. I've been here almost 9 years now. But I come to this work from a very personal place. I came to the United States as a child refugee fleeing with my family from state-sponsored anti-Semitism in the former Soviet Union, where I was born. And those early experiences, as well as the experiences of my family generally in the Soviet Union and Russia, as survivors of the Holocaust, as many in my family didn't survive. All of that has really informed my work and has really driven me in what I do every day. We have to understand that anti-Semitism is a phenomenon that is, much larger than any of us here at ADL are going to be able to tackle alone, right? We have a dedicated staff of 400 plus individuals who come to work at ADL every day to combat anti-Semitism, extremism, and hatred of all kinds. But anti-Semitism is a large phenomenon. It's been around for thousands of years, and it's much more than we can solve by ourselves, just the small but mighty staff at ADL. And we understood that in order to effectively tackle anti-Semitism, we would need to mobilize our entire Jewish community, right? And that's part of how this Kulanu initiative was really born. We really need all of you to be our partners, to be our eyes and ears, to be our advocates on the ground in your communities, doing this work alongside us. And we are here to support you. We are here to fight alongside you. But we really need your energy, your smarts, your connections, your wherewithal. So thank you from the bottom of my heart and all the staff here at ADL for making the time to be available and to be part of this fight. We also know that anti-Semitism is too large even for the Jewish community to solve alone. As Jonathan indicated, we really need allies in this fight. And it's not something that we can solve alone. And we'll get a little bit more into the specifics of that in a bit. The other thing that Jonathan also mentioned is that this has never been more timely and more urgent, certainly not during my lifetime. As Jonathan said, we are living through the highest levels of anti-Semitism on record that we have seen since World War II, right? As you see on screen there, our team has tracked this really explosion of anti-Semitism over the last number of years, nearly quadrupling in the number of anti-Semitic incidents since 2013. So this is really an urgent moment, and this initiative is really quite timely. So I have not that much time with you today. So what I thought I'd do is just share a little bit about anti-Semitism, what it is, its mechanics, how it functions, hopefully to inform your work and our work together going forward in this fight. So first of all, anti-Semitism, we know, has been around for a really long time, right? For thousands of years. It goes all the way back to antiquity, and we can find some of the earliest examples of anti-Semitism in recorded history in the Torah, right? The Exodus story has this episode, right? That begins when a new leader comes to power, who decides that the Jewish people pose a threat, not a religious threat. And this is really important to understand, but actually a threat to the nation, right? As a potential fifth column who poses a threat to the nation of Egypt, right? Now, this is not only one of the oldest anti-Semitic tropes, but it's also the most widespread today. When we did our landmark study, the Global 100 study, of anti-Semitism, we found that 41% of individuals, of respondents around the world, said that Jews are necessarily and inherently going to be more loyal to Israel, to Jewish interests, than they are to the countries where they live. In the United States, nearly a quarter of the American people said that Jews cannot be trusted to be loyal patriots to the United States, and ultimately are going to be more loyal to Israel than they are to the U.S. Now, why has anti-Semitism been able to endure for so long, right? Why is this something that we haven't been able to eradicate over thousands of years? There's a few reasons that we can identify. First of all, anti-Semitism survives by adapting, right? Very much like a biological organism, right? It survives by adapting to different social, political, religious, and other contexts, right? And it tends to take the form that fits with the particular milieu, the particular context within which it arises, right? So like a chameleon, anti-Semitism doesn't only look one way, it depends on the context within which it arises. And in so doing, it is able to continue to stay relevant and enrapture people, no matter the zeitgeist, no matter the political trends, no matter the economic or other trends of the day that it adapts to. Secondly, anti-Semitism is not only something that must be understood as living in the hearts and minds of human beings. It has survived over the ages because it is able to embed itself within the institutions, the systems and structures of our society, right? Third, anti-Semitism has a number of sort of what I call built-in self-preservation mechanisms. First of all, as we've seen recently, some of the remedies that are taken against anti-Semitism, right, only serve to confirm the conspiracy theory. So if somebody, goes on television or in the media, says something anti-Semitic, and then they get fired for it, that only serves to reinforce these notions that the Jews control the media, right? Secondly, the logic of anti-Semitism itself tells us that Jews are more or less uniformly rich, powerful, and privileged, right? And the logic then leads many people to believe that how can such a group be oppressed? If they're the rich, the powerful, and the privileged in our society, they're not the oppressed, they're the oppressors, right? And so you tend to see, even within anti-racist and social justice-oriented movements, people dismiss, deprioritize, or overlook anti-Semitism. So anti-Semitism is really resilient. It's able to survive because of these various aspects of these various characteristics. Secondly, anti-Semitism is not merely a sort of prejudice or a religious bigotry or racial animus, right? Anti-Semitism most often manifests as a kind of conspiracy theory, right? And this makes it somewhat different or distinct from other forms of bigotry, right? Anti-Semitism includes notions, again, that Jews are inordinately and almost supernaturally powerful, right? Able to control the banks, the media, governments and global bodies like the United Nations. We've even heard the Jews control the weather, right? And so this logic of anti-Semitism that elevates Jews as this inordinately powerful group enables us to be scapegoated for any number of social, political, economic, or other problems, be it a pandemic, economic depression or recession, foreign wars, right? Or anything else that you feel to be an ill in your society, right? Now, this is in a way very different, as I mentioned, from other forms of bigotry, because it alleges to punch up at its targets who, rather than punching down at a group that is characterized as inferior, right? Now, this has a number of problems that go well beyond the Jewish community, because as Yair Rosenberg wrote astutely in The Atlantic, people who embrace conspiracy theories to explain their problems lose the ability to rationally solve them, right? So if you believe that whatever economic problems are facing your society are the result of some kind of invisible Jewish cabal of bankers, you're never going to be able to run a modern economy, right? And so on. Right. So this is something that is actually toxic not only to the Jewish community, it's not only harmful to Jews, it actually undermines our ability to have a thriving society, a democracy, to rationally address the problems that persist in our society. Number three, anti-Semitism is often political, right? A lot of times, and you all will have seen this, when somebody gets charged with anti-Semitism, they will respond, no, this isn't anti-Semitism. These are just my political views, and I have a right to to express my political views. Well, it's important to remember that anti-Semitism has often been wielded as a political tool across the political and ideological spectrum. It has no inherent political locus. It's not a right-wing phenomenon or a left-wing phenomenon. It really has the power, again, by adapting to different ideological sort of frameworks and contexts. It's able to really enrapture people from across the political and ideological spectrum, right? And because Jews are perceived as, the problem for any number of social, political, or economic ills, right? You have people with very disparate ideologies, all sort of stepping into the same kinds of anti-Semitic modes of thinking, right? So one example, let's take a look at how this functions, right? I have here two tweets, one from the left, one from the right. Specifically around a social problem, right? Racism in our criminal justice system and in our system of policing. On the one hand, on the left, a conspiracy theory has arisen that the violence that has been enacted by police on people of color and the Black community in particular in the United States is because of training programs that U.S. police forces do with their Israeli counterparts, right? In other words, the reason that U.S. police brutalize people of color in the U.S. is because of the things they're learning from the Jews over there in Israel, right? Now, on the other side of the political spectrum, on the right, a different form of anti-Jewish conspiracy theory has arisen around this same issue. This time, they say, no, there's actually no problem with racism in our criminal justice system at all. It's all been invented by the Jews who are trying to foment civil unrest, to undermine our country, undermine our constitution, sow chaos, and bring the nation to its knees, right? That George Soros is paying Antifa, that Jewish billionaires are funding Black Lives Matter so that they can loot and burn cities and all of this kind of stuff, right? Now, these are very different perspectives on the same problem, but the outcome is the same. It essentially shirks accountability and responsibility for an American problem by saying either it's not really our problem, it's coming from the Jews somewhere over there in Israel, or actually there's no problem to solve at all. It's just the Jews making it all up, right? So we see the way that these anti-Jewish conspiracy theories undermine our ability to solve legitimate problems that we have in our society, right? Here's another example of how this functions, right? You have two political cartoons here, one from the left, one from the right. I'll leave it up to you to see if you can figure out which is which, right? The cartoon on the left basically has this evil-looking Jew stealing money from this collection plate of this poor family who's holding a sign that says federal poverty programs, right? And he's saying, be a patriot, goy. Somebody's got to pay $10 billion to Israel, right? On the right, we have a political cartoon that makes essentially the same claims. Here's this poor American who got a paltry $600 COVID relief check to help during the pandemic. Meanwhile, Uncle Sam rides away to Israel with a $500 million foreign aid military package, right? In other words, both of these are saying what? We cannot take care of our people. We cannot take care of Americans. Why? Because the Jews are bleeding us dry and sending all of our hard-earned tax dollars to Israel, right? So we see the way that even the same kinds of ideas can infect people with very disparate political ideologies, right? Now, this creates a very strange sort of phenomena where you have people who are very progressive and have been involved in progressive advocacy and activism for a long time, who end up sharing far-right, neo-Nazi, white supremacist ideas, quotes, etc. Here's an example of John Cusack, who's been involved in all kinds of progressive causes for many, many years, sharing a meme, right, that says, to learn who rules over you, simply find out who you are not allowed to criticize, with a giant Star of David, right? And this quote is attributed to Voltaire. It's not actually a quote from Voltaire. It's a quote from a neo-Nazi, right? So here is somebody who is of the left, who believes themselves to be an anti-racist, a progressive, sharing a quote about that alleges that Jews are sort of dominating and manipulating and subjugating people in the United States, right, from a literal neo-Nazi. Number 4, anti-Semitism can be conscious and overt, but more often than not, I would say it's unconscious and implicit, right? So anti-Semitism is almost, you can think of it as part of the air we breathe, right? As I said, it pervades our systems, our structures, our sort of institutions that make up our society, right? The things that we believe to be common sense, right? Received, inherited wisdom, all of these kinds of things, right? And so as a result of that, oftentimes people will internalize anti-Semitism without ever recognizing it, right? That means that when people engage, when they then externalize the anti-Semitism they have internalized by saying anti-Semitic things, sharing anti-Semitic memes, engaging in anti-Semitic behavior, supporting anti-Semitic policies, and so on, they are often doing so unwittingly. And it's important to remember that something can be anti-Semitic in intent, in form, or in impact, right? And just because we didn't intend to do harm, right, doesn't mean that no harm was caused. So that's a really important point that I urge you to keep in mind when you're engaging with people, not only outside the Jewish community, but even within the Jewish community, because Jews ourselves are not immune to this, right? We are part of this society, and at being part of this society, we too are capable of internalizing anti-Jewish ideas, beliefs, tropes, and behaviors. Number 5, anti-Semitism isn't really about Jews. Now, I know that sounds weird to say, right? But anti-Semitism is not really about Jews. It's a construct of the non-Jewish imagination, right? The Jew of the anti-Semitic imagination is a caricature, right? It's a fantasy that has very little to do with actual living, breathing Jews, and has much more to do with the collective fears, anxieties, prejudices, feelings of disenfranchisement and alienation of the broader collective, right? Anti-Semitism is a reflection of, or a manifestation or a symptom, but certainly an indicator of a broader and deeper social malaise, right? That is a deeper sickness within our society, right? So it's important also for young people, young Jewish people, to understand that the hatred and the ideas that are weaponized against Jews have nothing to do with Jews. It has nothing to do with the conduct of Jews, who we are, how we show up in the world, what we actually look like, or anything else. It actually is a psychological projection of largely the non-Jewish collective. Now, this, one of the implications that we have to understand of this is that if anti-Semitism is largely conceived, propagated, and practiced by non-Jews, that means that's where a lot of the work actually needs to be done. It's not on Jews to solve anti-Semitism, right? We didn't create it. We are largely not the ones practicing or propagating it. This has to be work done by largely non-Jews, right? Because that is where it's coming from. Lastly, anti-Semitism has to be understood as a canary in the coal mine, right? As I said, it's not something that is only a harm to Jews. It is broadly corrosive to our society. It is toxic to our democracy. And when we study anti-Semitism, historically, we find that it correlates with other forms of toxic phenomenon, right? Authoritarianism and the erosion of democratic norms and institutions. A certain kind of anti-intellectualism and contempt for scholarship, for knowledge, for expertise, right? And the consequent proliferation of various kinds of conspiracy theories, which again undermine our ability to rationally solve the problems plaguing our society. It tends to also accompany the propagation of other forms of bigotry, xenophobia, racism, and hate, right? So We see this all the time when you study, for example, white supremacists, those that are responsible for roughly 3 out of every 4 extremism-related murders in the United States, right? We see this over and over again, the nexus between anti-Semitism and anti-Blackness, right? The nexus between anti-Semitism and LGBTQ phobia, right? The nexus between anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, right? You see these various memes that allege you have a Muslim problem, right? Because you have a Jew problem, right? This notion that it's the Jews flooding countries with people who, quote unquote, don't belong there and undermine the society, right? We have been told this time and time again by some of our sort of greatest human rights luminaries, right? From Dr. King, who said that injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, to people like Emma Lazarus, who reminded us that none of us are free until all of us are free. Franz Fanon, who said that the anti-Semite is inevitably a negrophobe. We have to understand anti-Semitism as part of a broader set of anti-democratic and toxic phenomena in our society that are inextricably interwoven with one another. And so we have to do this work in a comprehensive way, by building coalitions with other groups who are also targeted by these various phenomena, right? And this isn't just theoretical, right? Over the last number of years, we have seen that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories have not only resulted in the mass murder of Jews, such as at the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh, but we have also seen the ways that anti-Semitic conspiracy theories have led to the mass murder of Muslims in Christchurch, anti-Semitic conspiracy theories that have led to the mass murder of Latino and Hispanic immigrants in El Paso, have led to the mass murder of Black folks in Buffalo, and so on and so on. Anti-Semitism doesn't only harm Jews. It targets other communities. And so we have to understand that we have to come together with other communities in order to effectively tackle anti-Semitism. So I'm going to wrap up where I started, right? I mentioned that, I came to this country as a refugee fleeing anti-Semitism in the Soviet Union. That didn't just happen, right? Freedom isn't free, as the now cliched expression goes. My freedom and the freedom of my family and, countless other Soviet Jews was made possible by people like you coming together within the Jewish community and bonding together in coalition with other folks who understand that our fates are inextricably intertwined with one another. In particular, people who came out of the civil rights movement, people like Dr. King, people like Bayard Rustin and others, to advocate for the rights of Soviet Jews. And we won. When we come together, we win. There are far more of us than there are of the hardcore anti-Semites, the racists, the white supremacists, and we can win. And I'm with you here today as proof, right, of the fact that when we bond together and when we coordinate and when we tackle this strategically and when we come together across lines of difference, both lines of difference, religious difference within the Jewish community, but also with other communities, we can and we will win. So thank you very much for being here. Thank you for being part of this initiative. And I'll turn it back to Tema.
Thanks, Vlad. I think we have just enough time for maybe 2 questions to you. So one already came in the chat, and I think it's a really good question. Somebody was wondering if ADL has attempted to confront white nationalists, left-wing anti-Semites, et cetera, directly. Are there attempts at dialogue and education with them? If not, why not?
Right. So we do have relationships with a number of what are called in the field formers. These are people who were former white supremacists, part of various kinds of radical, violent, anti-Semitic, racist, and other types of extremist groups. And we have worked with them in order to understand how these groups work, how they recruit, how they function, how they fundraise, et cetera. And also, a lot of these formers are now involved with trying to get other people out of these, out of this life, out of these gangs, right, out of these organizations. and put them back on a track to be, decent, contributing members of society. One exciting thing that I'll just point out is we recently launched a new research center at ADL, the Center for Anti-Semitism Research. And one of the things that we will be studying over the coming months and years is actually interventions, right? What is effective when it comes to interventions with people who have been indoctrinated or infected with these ideas? What works, what doesn't, right? So that we can sharpen our approach to combating anti-Semitism across various kinds of ideologies.
Great. And I saw Joe Nalvin put a hand up. So let's go over to you, Joe.
Good morning or good afternoon where you are. Let's imagine a world where there is no anti-Semitism. There will still be either tribalism, sectarianism, what have you. So if we are successful, what is our work finished? Or are we combining it with a kind of a two-tier approach? Humanity problems rather than just Jewish problems.
So a great question. I do think that some of this goes back to sort of, as you said, fundamental human questions, right? The evolutionary impulses that we have developed as a sort of safety mechanism, right? To say who looks like me and therefore is probably safe, and who looks different from me and might want to do me harm, might want to, from an evolutionary primitive perspective, who might want to eat me, right? You scan your field and identify who is safe and who is not. So there is a certain kind of innate tribalism, if you will, that comes from a very primitive part of our brain, the sort of the reptilian brain, the part that controls fight or flight mechanism, and so on. But there are, bell hooks, the feminist scholar and scholar of race, said that, wherever there is racism, wherever there's white supremacy, there's anti-Semitism, right? And when we fight anti-Semitism, we are also fighting racism, because these things are so bound up with one another. They are part of a superstructure, a matrix of oppression. And so by mitigating the rates of anti-Semitism in our society, this has ripple effects across our democracy, right? Will we solve every problem that plagues our society, as you said, around tribalism and various kinds of division when we solve anti-Semitism? God willing, someday we will. I don't know, perhaps not. But certainly by fighting anti-Semitism, you should feel confident that you are also making a dent in some of these other problems of hate and division and extremism in our society that anti-Semitism tends to foment and feed off of.